So moving on to our topic for today, it is my pleasure to introduce one of our amazing teachers, Danny Stein, who grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and attended the Jack M. Barrack Hebrew Academy, formerly known as a Hebrew Academy, for middle school and high school. In 11th grade, Danny came to Alexander Muss with his classmates for 4 months. Speaking of leadership development and speaking of the impact our program had, this life-changing experience eventually brought him back to Eretz Yisrael and to Alexander Muss High School in Israel. He made Aliyah to Israel in 2006 after graduating with a BA in history and psychology from University of Maryland College Park. For the last 15 years, Danny has worked as an educator for AIM-HSI in Israel and has had an impact in countless lives across the United States and across the world, not just with his students, with his colleagues, and with his friends. Danny now lives with Hannah and 4 beautiful, wonderful children in Moshav Mivo and Modi'in. It is my pleasure to turn our class over to our teacher, Danny Stein.
Thank you so much, Greg. And thank you to everyone for joining this afternoon. I really appreciate you joining, giving up some of your time. Just in terms of time, as a disclaimer, I see some of my former students here, and they all know that one of my greatest weaknesses as a teacher is sticking to time. So I know this is supposed to be about an hour, but it's already 10 minutes in, and I'm not sure it'll really be only an hour. If it goes a little bit later, I hope you'll forgive me. But there's a lot of ground to cover. It's a really important topic. And if worst case, if you have to leave and finish with the recording, that's okay too. Just to give you a sense, last night I actually gave a Zoom lecture at a college, Hamilton College, for a group of former students who were floundering. They had so much anti-Israel activity in their school at Hamilton. They needed someone to come in and kind of boost morale for the Jewish students, maybe educate some of the non-Jewish students as to what the other side is. That lecture was supposed to be 1 hour. It was at 2 a.m. It's supposed to be 1 hour, ended up being 2 full hours. So this won't be 2 hours, but I just want to give you a sense for you might be in for a little bit more time. But I appreciate you joining. I appreciate if you sticking on for as long as you can, and being with me to cover this extremely important topic. So I want to talk about the situation in Gaza a little bit. I'm going to talk about it historically and also, of course, what's happening modern. I'm not going to talk about the current war itself very much, but of course, we're going to get into certain aspects of it which are really important. But I want to make sure everybody can understand and deal with the fact that that we're dealing with an extraordinarily difficult situation. It's a complex situation. It's more complex than a lot of people realize. It's especially more complex than most people who dislike Israel, hate Israel, or don't support Israel realize. And I want to just equip everyone here with a lot of the ideas, facts, figures, and some of the most important concepts that really drive Israel's mission in Gaza, which has been going on now off and on since 2005, basically. This is just the largest and most significant, but this is something that's happened. These wars with Hamas in Gaza have been going on. I mean, the first was in 2008. We had another one in 2011. We had another one in 2014. We had another one in 2019. Another one in 2021, if you remember. This has happened, unfortunately, a number of times. Hopefully, the plan is, if you hear the Israeli government speak, that this should be the last one. But it's not going to be simple. So I want to give, first of all, a brief history of the Gaza Strip, just so everyone's on the same page, so we know what's going on, so we know when we refer to this. So it's just important to understand what the Gaza Strip is, in case anybody is not so familiar with it. This was the partition plan. This was what the theoretical two-state solution that could have happened in 1947. It did not. When Israel accepted this plan, the entire Arab world declared war on Israel, tried to wipe us out, tried to kill us all, and luckily for us, they failed. Gaza basically is this area over here. I'm sure you've seen it on maps, but basically what Gaza is important to understand. Gaza is the part of kind of British Mandate Palestine that the Egyptians took over in the War of Independence, right? There's no geographical area called Gaza. It's all one giant coast of Israel. There's no like river or mountain range or anything that it kind of differentiates Gaza from anywhere else. It's just this is the part of this land that Egypt took over and illegally occupied in the 1948 War of Independence. And that's important to understand for a number of reasons. First of all, that Egypt had no claim to it whatsoever, that already for those first 19 years of Israel, when Israel looked like this on my map on the right, Jordan had illegally occupied what they then called the West, and we still call a lot of us the West Bank. They got the strip over here, illegally occupied by Egypt. Neither country had any claim to it whatsoever. Those both could have been made Palestinian states. already, if they really wanted to, if they really cared about having a state, that could have happened already in 1948 or any time between 1948 and 67. So it's important to realize just what this is and who was ruling it for those first 19 years. It's also important to realize that while the Egyptians were there, they totally neglected the Gaza Strip. Okay, totally neglected it. By the way, I'm going to go back and forth from the slideshow and just and myself on the screen. If you want, it might be easier for you to go to the top of your screen. It says, I think, pin me. You can make me bigger if you want, rather than looking at everybody. It's up to you. You can decide what you want to do, but definitely I'll go back and forth between the slideshow and myself. It's important to know the Egyptians totally neglected the Gaza Strip. Okay, I was recently in the Sinai with my family on vacation. It was great. The Sinai, which who knows when we'll ever be allowed back there, but hopefully sooner than later. But the Sinai being not really, it's a different. Sure, I'll speak slowly. Sorry, it's another one of my when I'm teaching, I get super excited. It's hard to slow me down. But yes, I'll slow down. And it might be even longer though, but I'll slow down. It's important to realize that the Sinai Peninsula is over the Suez Canal. Different. It is also pretty much still neglected by Egypt and always was. The people there are different. They're better. They're different than the Egyptians on the other side of the Suez Canal. And Egypt always has treated the Sinai differently and more poorly, basically, and they still do. All the more so in the 40s and 50s with the Gaza Strip. Those weren't even Egyptians. Those were just Palestinian refugees that the Egyptians didn't care at all about. And so that's important because when Israel arrived in the Gaza Strip and took it over in a war that we did not want and did not start, in the Six-Day War of 1967, we came into a land that had been totally neglected, ridiculously impoverished. So many people were farmers, yet I believe that I forget which testimony it was. There was, I think, 1 or 2 tractors. These are all farmers. They didn't have tractors. Okay, this is the 1960s, late 60s. And so the first thing Israel will do is when we realize that we were not able to leave the Gaza Strip immediately, we tried to increase quality of life there. So one ironic example is we laid sewage pipes to bring running water and clean water to the residents all over the place in the Gaza Strip. Now, we did all kinds of other things. We built apartment buildings, a lot of things in the West Bank too, by the way. If you know the history if you know the history of the PLO, they actually threatened people and told people if you live in an Israeli-built building, then you're liable to be killed. So a lot of these buildings actually stayed empty for decades. But Israel tried to do what we could to increase the quality of life in the Gaza Strip. During those first, let's say, 20 years of Israel's rule in the Gaza Strip, you had a lot of Gazans that could come into Israel and work, which is what you see over here. Just an image illustrating it. But a lot of Gazans would come in and work in the kibbutzim, all these kibbutzim whose names you only learned on October 7th. But people from Gaza used to go in and work there. And a horrible twist of fate, just about a year and a half ago, Israel again started allowing people to work in these kibbutzim. And as time goes by, we seem to have more and more reports that some of those people were traitors, had basically been collecting intelligence, giving intelligence, in some cases maybe even guiding the terrorists on their murderous rampage on October 7th, people that had been working being paid by, knowing people personally. I mean, these are people that they worked side by side with for the last year and a half, and that was all apparently, for some of these people, something they were just gathering intelligence before murdering them, which is remarkable. But for the first 20 years or so of our rule, that's what was happening. There was and Jews from Israel, by the way, could go into Gaza. They excellent fish markets there. It's a big industry in Gaza, fishing. You could go into Gaza, you could eat great hummus, buy fish in the market, go shopping in the shuk, and that's what was going on. It wasn't obviously all roses all the time, but there was relative coexistence for a long time. I mentioned, by the way, the water pipes, because we'll come back to that in a second. There's going to be 2 major turning points here. The first Intifada, 1987, that's when this whole kind of picture I just described really broke. We won't talk about that today, but the second Intifada in the year 2, which broke out in the year 2000, is going to be a major turning point for the relationship between Israel and the Gaza Strip, because that's when the Palestinians started shooting rockets. Now, they started shooting rockets because while the West Bank was sending suicide bombers into Israel, there was already a pretty significant barrier between Israel and the Gaza Strip. And so it was not easy to go from the Gaza Strip into Israel and be a suicide bomber. But rockets, of course, they could do. And so these rockets started off relatively, again, I have an illustration here of one rocket being fired. If you follow the news, of course, this is not how it is anymore. At this point, it looks more like this, and multiple times a day, right? You have 50 rockets being fired at a time. At a time, I remember when I first moved to Israel, 60 rockets in a day was enough to start a war, and now you're getting 60 rockets in an hour on a regular basis. Just to give you a sense for how things have changed just in the last 15 years or so. That's when the rocket threat began. I'm going to focus a lot about the rocket threat today. Ironically, the rocket threat, if you're following the news, people aren't even talking about the fact that in the current war, I mean, usually that's a big part of the story, but because right now this war is so much bigger, no one's even talking about the fact that something like, I should double check the stats, but I think it's about 8,000 of these explosive missiles have been fired into Israel in the last month, which is quite a large number. And in general, we're talking about around 35,000, if I'm not mistaken, missiles fired into Israel since the year 2000. 35,000 approximately. That's a lot. Okay, we'll talk about that a lot because those missiles are a big part of the story. Now, just to clarify, what is the difference when I say a rocket or a missile? A rocket, and basically a missile it has a computer chip inside, a guidance system. It can hit. It's more accurate. A rocket doesn't have that. A rocket they use physics to just aim it, but you can't tell exactly where it's going to go. So Hamas has rockets, not missiles. Hezbollah on our north has both, missiles being much more threatening. Anyway, that's going to happen starting in the year 2000, and basically it's going to get worse and worse and worse over time. Now, big. One of these. Why did I mention the sewage pipes? Is because I took this screenshot from a video that Hamas put out just about 2 weeks ago, showing what we already knew. Those early rockets, and apparently, according to this video, also the current rockets. Where's Hamas getting the materials from? So a lot of it is from those very same sewage pipes that we laid in the 1960s and 70s, are being dug up by Hamas fighters. They're a perfect cylinder. They're cut up into pieces, and unfortunately, something that we put in the Gaza Strip to improve quality of life for Gazans has been sent back to us in a much more nefarious form, in the form of deadly rockets ever since, which obviously is ironic and disgusting and very upsetting for most Israelis. All right, the next kind of big turning point here is 2005. There's a lot to say about this. I'm not going to say anything about it today, but in 2005, other than what happened, which is that it was a difficult moment in Israel's history, we call it the disengagement from Gaza. In 2005, Israel is going to pull all of its residents, settlers, and army bases out of the Gaza Strip. There used to be in Gaza, just like the West Bank, there were Israeli settlements there, and there were Israeli army bases there. There was an Israeli military administration or military occupation, depending on who and what word you want to use, that existed in Gaza like it currently does in the West Bank, a similar situation. In 2005, Israel decided that it was no longer worth it for all kinds of reasons. And unilaterally, we did not get a peace treaty out of this. We were hoping it was going to be a good thing. Looking back in time, most Israelis do not think it was the right decision at this point. At the time, society was pretty much split, 2005. There was good reasons to think that maybe it wasn't worth it. Still, there are good reasons to think it might not have been worth it, but the results have not been promising. Like I said, we've had multiple wars with terrorists in the Gaza Strip. Now, it's important to understand this is a crucial point for anyone that wants to understand the Israeli political situation, why Israelis think what they think about the two-state solution and the West Bank. Well, what happens when we gave the Gaza Strip to the Palestinians unilaterally, only 1 year later, some of us probably remember this, only 1 year later, Hamas will win the only democratic election that the Palestinians have ever had. And then a year after winning the election, which was already disturbing enough, they're going to forcibly take over. There was a little civil war between the Hamas and the Fatah, the PLO in Gaza. Hamas is going to basically kneecap these people and throw them out of windows, literally, and take over. Even though Hamas was a smaller force, they fought better. They managed to take over. After winning the election, they managed to take over the Gaza Strip with relative ease in 2007. And this is a really important point for a lot of reasons. It's important point because you have to understand that is when Israel implemented our blockade of the Gaza Strip. That's when we stopped allowing what we call dual-use materials, things that can be used for military purposes, like concrete or limited concrete, and other things into the Gaza Strip. It was not always the case that Israel blockaded the Gaza Strip. Israel did that in response to Hamas taking over, which is a really important point. It's also important to understand that this is the third example where Israel gave territory up to our adversaries. Hold on 1 second. I don't know if you hear my kids, but I'm gonna tell them to be quiet. Sorry about that. I don't hear them squealing in the background. Anyway, it's important to understand that this is one of, as far as I can think of, 3 or 4 times that Israel has given territory to our adversaries, only to see that territory, rather than be turned into a positive place that made anything positive about it whatsoever, instead is taken over by Muslim fundamentalist terrorists, used as a base of terrorist operations against us. And the worst part being that when we left these places, like South Lebanon, for example, or like Gaza, for the example that we're talking about right now, when we left these places in 2000 for Lebanon, in 2005 with Gaza, we did this with a kind of an agreement, an unspoken agreement with the international community led by the UN that said, okay, we're giving the land back to these people, or to these people. If they ever attack us from there, you, the UN, and the European Union, and the United States of America, and the whole free world, you'll support our right to self-defense if they attack us from there, right? And of course, we got a kind of a collective nod from the international community. And that has proven to be false every single time. And so very few Israelis still have faith in the idea of giving land to these people, because they've seen it play out the same way multiple times, and they've seen that when we are attacked in these areas, the international community, as you're seeing right now, does not actually, well, right now might be a little different. Right now might be different. So far it's different, thank God. But generally, the international community, with the exception of the United States of America, generally does not really support our right to self-defense. Usually when we finally fight back, we're called, as you see in all kinds of news outlets, certainly on social media, and by certain governments around the world, we are war criminals, we are genocidal, we are all these things that you've been hearing about. Now, I want to talk about the fact that that something like I mentioned before, something like 35,000 missiles have hit Israel in the last since the year 2000, the last 23 years. Okay, I'm not sure that number's exact, 35, somewhere between 30 and 40,000. I think we're up to about 35, 37,000, which is a lot. This is just a graph of rockets by year up to 2021. But there's an important question here, which is for the first 8 years of this, okay, from 2000 to 2008, if you look on the left over here, basically approximately 8,000 missiles or rockets, are gonna hit Israel in those first 8 years, and Israel will do almost nothing back, almost nothing. Meaning we didn't really fight an operation. There was back and forth airstrikes, but we struck them, they struck us, but there was no significant operation to end the rocket threat for the first 8 years at all. And that probably, and you think about what that means, we did not have an Iron Dome back then. Every missile hit Israel back then. Iron Dome only came into operation in 2011 for the first time. And so why in the world did Israel allow that? I mean, it's crazy to think. I mean, I don't have to, I'll ask the question rhetorically, but how many rockets do you think would have to hit any country? America, England, France, Germany, any country in the world from a neighboring country before they would send their army and end the rocket threat? And the answer is, very, very, very few. Probably zero. They probably wouldn't wait for the rockets to hit. But the minute any missiles were hitting the territory of any of these countries, they would send their army in. They would end the threat, obviously. And Israel never, by the way, never did that, even until now, which is what we're trying to do now. But it's 23 years late, basically. And in those first 8 years, we had 8,000 missiles and barely responded. And the question is why? And this is the entire story, okay? And the reason is this. These are images not from this year. These are images mostly from 2014. But you've seen images from this year as well. But this is what Gaza looks like when Israel does respond, okay? This is what Gaza looks like when Israel does respond. And not only does Gaza look like this, but a lot of civilians die, okay? As you're seeing right now, every day, you open up the news, and I'm sure you're seeing the body count going up and up and up. And according to the Hamas figures, it's up to 10,000 people. Of course, that doesn't distinguish between Hamas and civilians, but there's thousands of civilians that have been killed in Gaza by us in the last month, okay? And doesn't matter how pro-Israel you might be. I think I'm the most pro-Israel person in the world. That's still terrible and tragic, certainly for the children. And it's important to understand it's not just buildings that get destroyed, but this is a really infamous event that happened in 2014 when basically 3 kids were running on a beach. They were identified by an Israeli boat that was about a kilometer offshore, right by a Hamas naval base. Okay, over here, the boat assumed that 3 figures in the middle of a war running toward a base were terrorists. They shot, they made a mistake, and an Israeli boat killed these 3 children. You can see them over here. If you haven't seen the images coming out this year, there's plenty to go around of dead Gazan children. Okay, and so if you're wondering why Israel generally has allowed Hamas to do what it does for the last 23 years, certainly since 2007, but really rockets we've allowed for 23 years without really ending the threat, it's because of this. It's because when we do try to fight back, we get images like this. We get images like this. We get headlines around the world like this, which is from the same event. Okay, we get headlines. This is from 2021, like this on the New York Times. I'm using New York Times because they're probably the worst, but there's many others that basically play Hamas's game, and what they do is they report the conflict as a tragedy for the Gazan civilians and nothing more. Now, it is a tragedy for the Gazan civilians, but when Israel fights back, this is the entire question: why is Israel allowed, so many missiles to hit Israel when no other country would do that? It's because there's serious consequences. When we fight back, this happens. When we fight back, our pilots actually kill innocent people, some of whom are really innocent, like the people you see here, which is a moral issue for us in Israel. But it's not just a moral issue. It's also a public relations and diplomacy issue. And basically, and this is what's important to understand, this is Hamas's entire strategy. Okay? This is their only true strategic weapon that they have. Okay? It's been called by certain academics very cynically, it's been called the dead baby strategy. But this is exactly what Hamas wants, and it works perfectly every time, and it's working perfectly this time as well. Hamas knows they can't destroy Israel militarily, right? The best that they ever did, of course, was October 7th. As terrible as it was one day. We immediately ended it. I saw a great article that said, as damaging as that was to Zionism, if this was the Jewish people at any other time in our history, that would have just been the start of a multi-day long pogrom. But our army came in, we fought them back, we ended it, and now we're, of course, ending it for real. As bad as it was, they can't destroy us militarily. But what can they do? What they can do is turn the entire world against us. And this is their entire strategy. And how they do it by getting their own people killed, having the Western media display those images constantly. So good people around the world that don't know much about Israel turn on Israel. The haters obviously hate Israel. But imagine how many people in America saw this. Again, this in 2014, this was a just war. And this was a mistake. Okay? And Israel's getting hit by thousands of missiles. It was a crazy situation. We made a mistake, but the war was just. How many normal Americans saw this front page New York Times and their mind was made up forever about who the evil genocidal regime is and who the freedom fighters are? And incredibly, and Hamas knows this, and the worst part of this whole story is that when the media does this, when the media does basically play Hamas's game, which is constantly report on the civilian deaths in Gaza, I'm not saying they should lie about it, of course. They shouldn't not report it, but they should put it in the proper context. They should hold Hamas responsible, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, for all the reasons why these people are getting killed by Israeli bombs, and the fact that every other country in the world would be doing what we in Israel are doing, if not far worse. But they don't do that. They put the pictures on the front page. They make it into a David and Goliath story, but extra ironic because now the Jews are Goliath. Oh, what a twist of fate, right? And this plays into this story that the media has been telling about us for many years. If you saw the interview relatively recently, I think it was half a year ago, where the BBC asked Naftali Bennett, so Israel likes to kill children. I imagine you all saw that one. But that was so typical of the coverage of this entire conflict. But what it does, the worst part of this whole story, is when the New York Times makes this their front page, right? Again, this is a significant event. But when this becomes their front page, or when this becomes their front page, which again, generally the New York Times is not putting pictures of, they didn't do, as far as I know, there's no picture like this from the Ukraine war, okay, even though it's been going on for a year and a half. But they did do this for the week and a half long war in 2021, which says a lot. Ironically, by the way, some of these people are known terrorists, not the little kids, of course, but some of the 16, 17-year-olds are people that were killed in action, in fighting. But regardless, what they're doing here is incentivizing Hamas to continue to get their own people killed. That's the worst part. They are literally acting as foot soldiers for Hamas in the Western world, saying, Hamas, keep getting your own people killed. We will continue to report the news exactly like you want to. We will give you exactly what you want, which is your victory over Israel. How do they get a victory? If enough people are turned against Israel, and if the governments of the world eventually get so fed up with what happened with the carnage in Gaza, as you're about to see, then they don't allow Israel, or even our best friends like the US, don't allow Israel to get a true victory. And every time, Hamas just got stronger. And the media was complicit in this entire thing every step of the way. They're literally acting, they don't realize it, or maybe they do, they don't care, but they're acting in the service of a terrorist organization. Again, if you make it all about Hamas's entire strategy is to make it about numbers and about dead Palestinian children, basically. That's their entire strategy. And by the way, if you're paying attention to the news, it's working perfectly in the media and on social media. Luckily, so far, at least the governments of America and the Western European countries have not yet, have not yet done what they always do, which is eventually say, Israel, okay, Israel, you've killed too many people. Enough is enough. You have to stop now. We're expecting it to happen soon, but we hope that it won't. And when I say hope, actually, I'll talk more about that in just a minute. This is a headline just from yesterday, I think, or 2 days ago. And what it says is exactly what we in Israel are afraid of, right? What it says is the U.S. warns Israel privately amid the Gaza carnage. It does not have long before the support erodes. And the point is, this is exactly what Hamas wants. What Hamas wants is for the American government to eventually say, okay, Israel, you have to stop now. This is what's happened every single time up until now. And if it happens this time, I will tell you, this is kind of my major point throughout the entire session today. If it happens this time, it is a disaster. It is going to be a disaster that I don't think people really appreciate just how much of a disaster it will be. If this time the same ridiculous script plays out, which is Hamas basically gets its own people killed. I'll explain how in just a few minutes if you don't know, but I'll explain how in just a few minutes. If Hamas is allowed basically to get to be victorious, meaning before Israel can actually get the job done, that the support in America goes away. The American government says, okay, Israel, you've done too much damage. The humanitarian catastrophe is too great. You have to stop now. I want you to understand that at a certain point, two things will happen very, very quickly. One is that our enemies will be forever emboldened because they will realize that there's actually no way for Israel to get a true victory against them as long as they hide behind civilians. Okay, if even after October 7th this happens again, our enemies will have confidence and the next attack will be just around the corner. Will it be 1 year, 2 years, or 5? I don't know, but it is a direct message to Iran and Hezbollah to get their guns ready, to sharpen their knives, because there's really nothing Israel can do. We will not be allowed, even by our best friends, to get victory. And that will lead, by the way, to people leaving Israel. At a certain point, people will not stay in this country if we think that the army actually can't protect us, right? We have to get victory here because otherwise people will not stay here. People will not, and so I'm telling you this because for anyone here that is well connected, politically especially, this is an emergency. This is an emergency. If the CNN headline that I just showed you from Friday is true, if it's actually true that the US has started to tell Israel that it's not long before the support goes away and Israel's going to have to stop before victory, we will have a disaster here in Israel that is in some ways much worse than October 7th. And that's hard to say. It's a difficult thing to articulate, but I think it's true. And so anyone that has any political connections should know that this is the entire battle right now is for people to not let Hamas's cynical game of getting their own civilians killed prevent our victory again. If it does, even after October 7th, we are in big trouble. And people in America need to do whatever they can. I don't know what it is. It's working through Congress or AIPAC or JNF or whatever it might be whatever they can to make sure that the United States leads the charge to allow Israel to do this for many, many months, despite all the horrible images coming out of Gaza. Those images will continue. The Gazan civilians will continue to die because that's what Hamas wants. There's no way to avoid it, unfortunately. I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But it cannot be allowed to happen this time. If it does, it's a disaster, and everyone in the U.S. should be working as hard as they possibly can to prevent this from happening. And like I said, the headline on Friday said it's already maybe happening behind the scenes, and if it is, then we have a serious problem. Now, I want to say that because I don't want to forget. I could have ended with that, but I'm going to say it now just because I didn't want to forget it, and it's important to say it now. Now, what I want to show you here is back to kind of like this whole story about these rockets and about the whole civilian casualty numbers. Because if you look at these years, it's not just images of individual innocent people getting killed in Gaza, but just look at the years. I mean, look at the numbers here. I'm using mostly anti-Israel numbers just to make a point in terms of who a civilian is. But whether it be B'Tselem or whether it be the UN, two organizations that are not, great friends of Israel to say the least. But in 2008, just take a look at this. Israel lost 13 people, and in Gaza, 1,400 people. Okay. In 2011, we lost 6 people. They lost about 170. Okay. In 2014, we lost 73 people. In Gaza, 2,250 people died. In 2021, 13 people, and in Gaza, 256. The point that I'm trying to make here, it does not take, if any neutral person, okay, who doesn't understand the conflict, looks at these numbers, some people here might be wondering, well, if that's true, right? If you look at these numbers and see that in 2014, in Israel, under 100 people died, and in Gaza, over 2,000 people died, well, for most people, that is enough. That's all they need to know. And between that and seeing a picture of dead Palestinian children, that's all they need to know. Israel is a genocidal regime. The Palestinians are innocent freedom fighters. And that's all I need to know. Because look how many more people Israel killed every single time. Hamas wants to make it all about the numbers game. And so what I want to do for the rest of our time together is explain this numbers game and why it is so misleading and to the point of being deceitful. Why are the numbers this way? Right? Because Hamas's entire strategy is make it about the numbers game and get their own people killed. And let's talk about these for a second. Let's be a little bit critical for a second and talk about why the numbers are this way. Why so few Israelis die and why so many people in Gaza die. So I'm just going to analyze it for a few minutes. People in Israel don't die because the Israeli government, thanks to the American government, has invested billions of dollars in our safety. Okay, we've been hit by, I said, about 35,000 explosive missiles. I'm just going to show you a video that is from a few days ago in Israel. In case people don't think these missiles are deadly, the missiles are deadly. Okay, just take a look at this for a second. You'll see what I'm referring to. It's just a short clip, but hope you can see it. Take a look at this. This is a video that just came out. This is from a rocket hit from a few days ago.
חברים, אני פה ברובע A. נפל ממש. וואי. שם ירחם.
Just to clarify, right? There are people out there that think that these rockets aren't deadly, that they don't do a whole lot of damage. So if one of these rockets hits anywhere near you, you'll die, right? You and everyone you know in the area will die. They are giant explosives. We've been hit by almost 40,000 of them. So the fact that Israelis don't die is not because they're not deadly. No, they're very deadly. Unfortunately, some Israelis have been hurt and killed, but generally not too many. And these reasons, there's a number of reasons, a number of things we've done to keep ourselves safe. So it's kind of 3 levels that I'll talk about. I'm sure everyone knows this, but I should have had a better picture here. I should have had a picture of one of the beautiful bomb shelters in Sderot, painted by the JNF. But I don't have a picture of that right now. But everyone here knows, I assume, that the JNF has a great project painting the bomb shelters in the south. But what you have, the first level of defense, of course, is bomb shelters everywhere, especially in the south of Israel. So every bus stop has a bomb shelter next to it. Every apartment has, if you can see over here, has basically a safe room and a bomb shelter. As I'm sure, on October 7th, this was a big part of the story. Some of these safe rooms became death traps, but for a lot of people, they saved their lives. But the idea here is, and now this costs a ton of money. If you live in the Sderot area, you'll get this for free. If you live where I live, just so everybody knows, I'm going to build a home, hopefully in the next few years. By law, I must put a safe room in, a reinforced concrete bomb shelter. I have to pay for it out of pocket. It's another approximately 130,000 shekels that I must put in by law, and no one's going to pay for that for me. Okay, and every house in Israel must have one. Every new house. If you live in the south area, you get one from the government for free, paid for by my tax dollars and everybody else. So it's important to realize just how much money and time goes into giving every single person their own personal bomb shelter, not to mention the public ones. We don't only have bomb shelters. We have an incredible, we'll talk about this in a second, but we have an incredible alert system here in Israel where the rockets go off and within seconds, I don't even know how this works. It's an amazing marvel technology. Within seconds, I will get a text message of where the rocket is going. And if it's going towards me, I'll hear a siren. Now, this happens within seconds, first of all, which again is remarkable. But it also is amazing because this alarm system gets better and better every year. Running to the bomb shelter is not fun for anyone who's ever done that. So the government wants as few people as need be to run to these bomb shelters. And so what do? The alert system is kind of divided up into smaller and smaller areas every year, and it's made more and more accurate every year. So, for example, this is the first year where if the town next to me, Modin, goes to the bomb shelter, I'll hear their siren, but we don't have to go. It used to be that all of us had to go because it was a larger area. But this thing costs hundreds of millions of dollars to maintain, operate, right? It's an incredible thing. And of course, that's all without this. The first level, of course, is the bomb shelters. The second level of keeping Israelis alive is the alarm system, the siren system. And the third, of course, everybody knows, is the unbelievable Iron Dome. So just a few words about the Iron Dome, about why it's so incredible. For anyone that doesn't know, the Iron Dome is one of the greatest defensive weapons to ever exist. It is a weapon that is, so as you can see, it's a missile system. It shoots the missiles out of the sky. I could show you, I won't right now. This is kind of how it works. Whatever, some graphics here, but I'll just explain some of the most important parts. I can show you a video that I took last night of the Iron Dome shooting out of the sky and my house shaking. These were missiles that were headed towards Tel Aviv, which I can see relatively well from where I live. But they weren't coming over here. But at night we could see these explosions in the sky from where I live. It's crazy. The Iron Dome is unbelievable. First of all, it's a weapon. It shoots these things down with a success rate of over 90%, probably 92% by now. Okay, meaning it almost always works. Now, almost always is great, but if they shoot 100 rockets, 10 are getting through. So 90% success rate, which is amazing. It also only targets missiles that are going towards populated areas. It won't target a missile, if a rocket that's going to fall in the sea or in the forest, for example, because we don't want to waste our money and these valuable missiles on those. But the most amazing thing about the Iron Dome, just to give you a sense, this is not the first ever anti-missile system. This system, it used to be, in the Cold War, we were worried about, Russia sending intercontinental ballistic missile through space that will fall on America. Those things are the size of basically, spaceships, and they fly for hours. And so America has a way to calculate, a school bus sized rocket flying for hours. So America knows how to shoot that down. The Iron Dome can shoot something down that is the size of your arm, and we can do it in less than 15 seconds. That is unbelievable. It is an incredible, incredible, incredible system. It's only getting better and better as time goes on. But each one of the batteries costs $200 million. And each missile costs between $20,000 and $40,000. So we can do the math, but I just did the math in the previous war in 2021. 2021, I don't remember what it was. Something like $80 million were spent just on the missiles alone, shooting these things down. Okay, meaning it works great, but there's a serious downside. Thank God the U.S. has been sending aid specifically for the Iron Dome to help us pay for it. But that's a ton of money. The unbelievable amount of money that it takes to shoot these things down is unfortunate, because that could be used for all kinds of other more important and better things in Israel. It's not. It's used to build bomb shelters and make the alarm system and work the Iron Dome. So Israelis aren't killed not because these rockets aren't deadly, but because we've invested infinite money in keeping ourselves safe and alive. And that's important. Now, the horrible irony here, and I'm sure everyone's seen the quote from Golda Meir, which talks about this, but basically, I'll tell you a quick story to illustrate my point here. There's a school in Sderot that we always take our students to that has a plaque on it. It had direct hit from a rocket on the school. Okay, directly from Rocket School many years ago. It was before 2014. I don't know what year it was, but sometime before 2014 this school was hit by a rocket. Now, if you scour the internet, I promise you, you will not find one article about it. Not one. It did not make the news outside of Israel. Why? Because no one died. No one died. Okay, the school was reinforced already, and it was a direct hit, but no one died. I don't even know. Maybe the school wasn't even in session. But I bet if Israel bombed a school in Gaza, I bet you'd hear about it on the news, even if no one got hurt, because that's how the news would play it. Now, in Israel, no one. Now, why did this not make the news? Because no one in the school died. And unfortunately, that leads me to my horribly ironic point, which is that the fact that not enough Israelis die is one of the major reasons why people don't think we should really defend ourselves, right? They basically say, Israel, look at the numbers. Look how many of them are dying. Very few of you are dying. So you're wrong. So you shouldn't defend yourselves. There's all kinds of articles by really smart people, professors, intellectuals, columnists, talking about exactly this. And it leads to that Golda Meir quote. I'd rather, what does she say? I forget the quote exactly. I'll put it in my own words. But basically, I mean, would I rather be, people seem to really support us as long as we're dying, right? On October 7th, we got like 3 days of amazing support all around the world. Remember that? You guys remember? A month ago, 3 days where the whole world was supporting Israel because a lot of Israelis died. And the minute we try to prevent ourselves from dying again by fighting back, much of that support just kind of evaporates. And it's very, very frustrating to me that Israelis only are allowed to defend ourselves as long as we're dying. And if we're not dying, then we don't really have the right, according to many, many, many people, to defend ourselves. And that is, as an Israeli, infuriating. So I don't think other countries are held to that standard. And if you ask me if I'd rather be loved and dead or hated but alive, I think you know my choice, right? And that's, of course, what Golda Meir says as well. And of course, but I'm very, very angry as an Israeli that's kind of the choice that I've been given by most of the international community. You're not dying, so why should you defend yourself? We're not dying only because we defend ourselves. Is this not obvious to people? Anyway, so these are the three reasons. These are the reasons why, when we talk about body counts, which is what Hamas wants to talk about, why our body count in Israel is relatively low. Thank God. Okay, because we invest a lot in trying to keep ourselves alive. I wish the world would give us credit for it rather than telling us, oh, because you don't die, you shouldn't really defend yourselves, which is basically what we get all the time. Now let's talk for a few minutes about why the numbers in Gaza are so high. And you all know this already, but or if you've been following the news, you certainly know this, but I want to go over it just in case maybe there's some parts that I can shed light on. First of all, it's important to note that the numbers of Gazans dead is all despite the fact that Israel does an incredible amount to try to we don't want to fall into Hamas's trap. We don't want to kill their civilians because we know that it's damaging to us. And we don't I have a friend who flies an F-15. I promise you, my friend does not go home at night thinking how happy he is that he dropped a bomb on an innocent family. Okay? We have an obvious moral obligation to not kill innocent people. And more than that, or equal, or I don't know if it's more equal, whatever it is, we know it's strategically disastrous for us. So we do our best to not kill Gaza civilians. What do? It's basically three things. This is an image it's a really blurry image, but it's the one that I found earlier, of leaflets being dropped out of an Israeli plane, basically saying this neighborhood has been used by Hamas, evacuate it because there's going to be bombs dropped here in the immediate future. So first of all, we drop leaflets. The second thing we do, you can see this all over YouTube, is we make phone calls. These Gazans will get a personal phone call by an Arab-speaking Israeli soldier. And again, if you haven't seen these, you should really look these up on YouTube and watch them. They're unbelievable. And they'll say, this is Israel. There's going to be a bomb dropped in your area immediately. Get out of your house right now. Evacuate. And the third thing that Israel does to try to warn these people is we have something that we do generally, although not doing it so much this time because this war is different for all kinds of reasons, which is called the knock on the roof, where we drop basically a bomb on the roof of their house that does not explode, just makes a loud thump. And the idea is this is your 2-minute warning. Get out immediately. If you didn't leave because of the leaflets, and if you didn't leave because of the phone call, you better get out now. And this is your last signal. Now, Israel does this because we don't want to allow Gazan civilians to die, but it doesn't take a genius to realize how militarily stupid this is. Because the civilians are not the only ones that get out of the way. You know who else gets out of the way? The Hamas terrorists, obviously. And we are, by every time we warn before we strike, we are giving the terrorists an advantage. Every time. And we do it all the time. And if you read the news, this is not the story, which it should be. Israel should be getting credit for this every time. Instead, if you saw these headlines early on in this ground in the war just from a few weeks ago, where everyone was saying, how dare Israel not warn them? Because this war, after October 7th, is a bit different. This is not a limited operation. This is the end of Hamas no matter what, which means that we can't afford to be as absurdly humanitarian and nice as we usually are. And so we're warning less. We're still warning a lot. As you know, we basically told everyone, move from the north to the south. We will be attacking the south far less. We are risking our lives. If you saw the video today, you should check it out. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to show it, but of the Israeli army standing by while Gazans are walking down the road south to get them out of harm's way. And of course, our enemies call this forced displacement and ethnic cleansing. Only a truly immoral person can take the idea that we are giving up the advantage, telling everyone where we're going to strike, letting them leave, and then saying that's forced displacement rather than I don't have a fancy word for it, but keeping these people alive, keeping them out of harm's way. It's amazing to hear these Israel haters talk about how this is another Nakba, just like what happened in 1948. It's unbelievable. But that's what they do, because people that hate Israel they really won't stop at anything to try to make us look bad, even when we're trying to keep Gazan civilians alive. Despite that, many Gazan civilians die. And the reason is twofold. Number one,
Yes. Oh, yes, thank you.
Number one is they do not fight in uniform, okay? There's countless images like this. When they came into Israel, of course, or when they make propaganda videos, they like to look all big and bad. When they fight in civilian clothing. And that's for two reasons. One, they'll be counted as civilians when they die, and which is good for their body count game that they play with the New York Times. And two, it makes it impossible for Israel to know. Wait, if my friends right now are in Gaza, if they see anyone that is between the ages of, let's say, 15 and 40 and male, walking across the street, my friends don't want to get killed. They're going to have their finger on the trigger, and if that person moves quickly, they might get shot, which is really terrible. You know how you avoid that by having the combatants fight in uniform. It's a war crime to not fight in uniform. Hamas, of course, cynically uses this to get their own people killed, because that's their entire strategy, like I said countless times. Speaking of war crimes, by the way, we'll just say one quick thing about war crimes. It's important to realize that these missiles they fire at us, people like to talk about Israel's war crimes, okay, because they see a lot of people dying in Gaza. Number one, if you ever see anyone, no matter how intelligent they are, no matter how much of an expert they are, talking about a war crime that Israel committed, like on the hospital, for example, the hospital that Israel bombed in the beginning, of course, that we all know about now. Within a few minutes, people talking about war crimes. You cannot know if something is a war crime without studying the strike deeply. You have to know a lot of things. There's no way to know about a war crime within minutes. It's impossible. The amount of people dead does not mean anything better. I mean, it might mean something in the end of the investigation, but does not equal a war crime. War crimes have to do with intent, have to do with what intelligence. There's a lot of things. Meanwhile, every Hamas missile, or almost every one, is not just a war crime. It's a double war crime. It's a war crime twice. Why is it a war crime twice? Is what I'm about to get to. Because they're firing at civilian areas in Israel, like everyone who's seen people running to bomb shelters, right? They're firing at civilian areas. That is a total war crime, as everyone knows. But they also fire from civilian areas, which is also a war crime. Each one of these rockets is a war crime twice. Yet, again, it's incredible. People aren't even talking about the missiles anymore. The missiles is like old news. Have you been hearing about the missiles? I read New York Times, CNN, and I don't even hear about the missiles anymore. It's unbelievable. It's like it's not even happening. There's still hundreds every day, and there's thousands in the first week and a half or 2 weeks. And this is the entire story, right? The entire story is this is what they do. They fire from inside civilian areas, and they give Israel an impossible choice. I'll give you another, right? This is an image that just came out yesterday. This is, if you watch the video, again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to show the video, but you can look it up yourself. This is in a Boy Scout troop, the equivalent of like a Boy Scout troop in Gaza, okay? They show on the other side of the wall over here all these nice like murals that the kids painted for their Boy Scout troop, and over here you have about 50 or 60 rockets that were fired probably at once in a huge barrage from their building. Okay, so when I say they fire from civilian areas, I really mean they fire from civilian. They fire from schools, hospitals, mosques, Boy Scout troops, and in general, just within packed neighborhoods. And that puts Israel in a literally impossible situation, because we are left with two options. Either we allow these missiles to fly into Israel, 1 out of 10 gets through, and some people die, or we don't fight back. Excuse me. Or either we allow them into Israel, we don't fight back, or we do fight back and we bomb that Boy Scout troop, and either there's kids in there that die, or the Boy Scout troop is destroyed without the kids, but that's still gonna be something on the news, another war, so quote unquote war crime that Israel's committed. How could Israel possibly justify bombing a Boy Scout troop headquarters, or whatever you want to call it? And
I tried to do this.
This is Hamas's. Sorry, if everybody can mute, that'd be great. So this is Hamas's entire strategy. This is what they do. This is how they win. They win by firing from civilian areas, by getting us to either lose morale by not fighting back, or when we do fight back, everybody hates us, which is what you're seeing right now. It's playing out in front of your face as we speak. Here's two great images. These are houses that were warned by Israel about what was going to happen. We had basically warned, this is an arch terrorist house. Evacuate it. We're going to bomb this house, whether there was rockets or computers or money, whatever it was inside. This was a military target. And what did Hamas do? This is from years ago. Is they had a crowd come to the roof. You can see the two circles are showing kids on the roof, and basically daring the IDF to actually do it. Here's another one. Okay, same deal. They brought a bunch of women to the roof and said, "Okay, you want to bomb this house? Do it now." And of course, in both cases, Israel will not bomb these houses. And that gives the Hamas infinite amount of time to evacuate all their rockets, all their money, all their computers, and everything else, and move to the next place. And if we do fight, when I say they fire from civilian areas, this is what I'm referring to. And this is their entire game, like I said. When we talk about getting their own civilians killed, again, if you didn't see this image yet, I hope you did, but this is on the left here, you have the roadblock blocking people from going south. Israel's been telling people for a month to leave North Gaza, get south, and you got Hamas, Hamas roadblock. Here you have, again, I'm not going to play for you the dialogue just for the sake of time. You should look it up yourself. But here's a phone call that we released with a Gazan civilian who said they're not letting us go south. They're shooting at people. Okay, there's at least one instance or two instances in which people going south were basically violently massacred. No one has eyewitness testimony as to who did it. People that Israel are saying that Israel did it. I would tell you that Israel has no incentive whatsoever to bomb civilians that are fleeing. It only serves Hamas's interests. So I'm going to assume without proof that Hamas, because it serves their interest, wanted to stop people from getting out of harm's way. And so they, in two instances at least, killed people going south. And that is a huge part of the story. Now, by the way, my house is shaking right now. I didn't see where these bombs are falling, but as we speak, my house is shaking, just so you know. Just from the booms, which are probably a few miles from here. There's another aspect of this whole story, of this whole, body count numbers game story, which Hamas wants to make it all about that. And the other part is, when we see these numbers of, I'll go back to my statistics. I'll use the last war as the best example. Okay, 2021, 13 people died in Israel, 12 civilians were hit by rockets, which is, by the way, not a small number. And 250 people died in Gaza. Not approximately. It was really I think it was exactly 128 and 128. 128 Hamas were killed, and 100 terrorists from various organizations, and 128 civilians. That's important because according to the UN itself, in urban warfare, 90% of wartime casualties are civilians. Meaning, generally, you're talking about a ratio of 10 civilians killed or 9 for every 1 militant or terrorist that's killed. We're talking about places like Mosul and Raqqa and all kinds of in other urban warfare settings that America has fought in. You're talking about in the Iraq war, at a certain point, America was killing, just so you know, 18 civilians for every 1 fighter they killed. It's unbelievable, actually. Eventually, by the end of the war, you could learn all about the whole, what we call the civilian to combatant ratio in war. But America eventually, after trying really hard, gets it down to approximately 4 to 1, meaning 4 civilians for every 1 terrorist militant. Okay, in Israel, in almost all of our wars, we're talking about a ratio of 1-to-1, or at worst, we're talking about maybe 2-to-1. Maybe we kill double the civilians. It sounds really terrible. Israel kills twice as many civilians. How horrible is that? It really is horrible. But if you know anything about war, that is incredible. That is, Israel should have, in 2021, just to clarify this, Israel probably should have gotten a medal for what happened in 2021. 2021, we dropped 1,000 bombs on Gaza and only killed 128 civilians. We had a ratio of 1-to-1, same number of that is something like 4 times better than America ever was in Iraq and Afghanistan. And by the way, 10 times better than what the UN says is normal for urban warfare. Did you guys hear Israel getting any credit? Anybody impressed by Israel? Was there a front page article on the New York Times talking about how amazing it is that Israel had a ratio of 1-to-1 rather than 9-to-1, which it normally is? No, I didn't see that article either. So it's really important when people are doing this whole body count comparison. It's important to realize that you cannot compare Israel to I don't know, Fiji or some utopian fictitious place that doesn't exist, that never fights wars. Okay, has Israel killed more people than Fiji has? Yeah, we certainly have. Okay, Finland too. It's true. Okay, any country that actually fights wars is not even they're not close. We're talking about we're somewhere between 4 times better and 10 times better at not killing civilians than countries in war. Yet somehow this gets completely overlooked and dismissed by almost everybody, even really good, intelligent people. All right, so I'm going to try to wrap this up pretty quickly, but I do have one more really important kind of topic to talk about before we finish, and that is that while it's true that the point that I've been trying to make so far is that playing Hamas's numbers game and allowing the numbers to I mean, look, when I see images of dead Gazans, I don't feel good. And when I look at the numbers, those numbers are jarring. Look how many more Gazans killed. That sounds crazy. But if you look at the why, if you understand why so few Israelis die and why so many people in Gaza die, it's crucial to put the responsibility where it lies and to not penalize Israel for not letting its civilians get killed, which is what so many people want to do. So the numbers game is, like I said, very, very misleading to the point of being deceitful. The last thing I want to talk about before we go is, I'll skip these for now, is this. This is from a number of years ago, but it summarizes, I think, the feeling of a lot of people. Why doesn't Israel get the right to fight back like every other country does, generally? And even now, like we saw, maybe the support, even with October 7th, is eroding, as CNN was saying. Because here's right out of the Washington Post, it says, most of these rockets fired from Gaza are like bee stings on the Israeli bears behind. Meaning, big deal. They don't do it. These rockets don't do a whole lot. Most Israelis don't get killed anyway. So why is Israel dropping all these bombs? Right? Why should Israel fight back? What the Washington Post is basically saying here is Israel shouldn't fight back because the rockets really aren't such a big deal. And if you look at the numbers, we do a lot in Israel to make these missiles not, forget about October 7th for a second, which I don't mean forget it, obviously, but forget about the fact that terrorists can actually cross the border and murder people, which is a relatively new phenomenon. But these missiles are a serious problem. There's another aspect here, which I didn't touch on at all, which I'm going to mention now, which is the emotional aspect of the emotional toll that it takes on Israeli society. Okay? Because when people run to the bomb shelter, even if they don't die, first of all, many people in Israel have been killed or have died running to the bomb shelter, or injured, died and injured. People have had heart attacks. Happened to a young girl this year, had a heart attack on her way to the bomb shelter. I forget what, it was a few days into the war. Heart attacks, falling down the stairs, okay? But sprinting to the bomb shelter, look, where I live, I'll just give you, I want to show you a quick video about this, and then I'll make my points about this. Again, I apologize to people who need to leave already. One of us recording, that's great, but I'm going to go for another probably 15 minutes or so, just so you're aware. Let me just get my video here. Hold on. Okay, again, this is not from the current war. This is an older video, but it makes my point the way I want to make it. So I'm going to show it to you. It's called 15 Seconds in Steroid. Just make sure you can hear my sound. Sorry, hold on. Let me make sure you can hear the sound. Sorry, 1 second. Give me 1 second. Okay, we're good.
מתי אתה פה מהבוקר? מה אתה יכול לספר לי על הפעילות?
שתעשו להם.
ואיך היה היום? אתה יכול לספר מה היה?
בסדר, היה טרפולינות.
וואו.
And the point, of course, is even when these rockets don't wreak destruction or death, there's an unbelievable psychological toll that it takes on the people of this country. So it is said that there is something like people that live in the what we call the Gaza envelope, Otef Aza, or the cities like Sderot and Ofakim, something like 75% of people are walking around with PTSD, and over 90% of the children. Okay, we're talking about people that have serious psychological and mental issues because they're sprinting for their lives all the time. And they have 15 seconds. Again, where I live, just to give you a sense, 15 seconds, just on a personal level, where I live, we have a minute and a half. A minute and a half is an eternity to get to the bomb shelter. We never have trouble getting to the bomb shelter, okay? But in my old, just to give you a sense, in my old house, the bomb shelter was a little bit further away. I'll tell you just a personal story. My wife was at home. We had 2 kids at the time, only 2. Okay, it's not a lot of kids. Now we have 4. We had 2 kids. There was a siren in the middle of the day, and we had like a 30-second run or so to get to the bomb shelter in my old house. And my wife grabbed the kids, they were younger, grabbed the kids, started to go, and immediately realized that there was no way she was going to make it. And she stayed in the house. They basically crouched down next to a certain wall and hoped that the rocket didn't hit our house, which it didn't, thank God, and everybody was fine. But with a minute and a half and 2 kids, my wife couldn't make it. Okay? They could have all died. Now, imagine living down south where you have 15 seconds. Okay? 15 seconds is, and now imagine you have, what if you have 3 young kids? What if you have 3 young kids? Is there any way you're getting 3 young kids? Let's say you have a baby, a 2-year-old, and a 4-year-old. Pretty common in Israel. Anybody getting those, all 3 of them, into the bomb shelter in 15 seconds? The answer is absolutely not. You're not getting to the bomb shelter in 15 seconds. Okay, it's basically impossible. Unless if you're sleeping there, fine. But during the day, and there are times of the year where people that drive around these areas are told not to strap their kids into the car seat. Imagine this. Imagine being told by the government it's actually better for you not to strap your kid into their car seat than to strap them in, because even with Israeli crazy drivers, it's actually safer to not strap your kid in, because in 15 seconds you're not getting your kid out of the car seat and away from the car in time. Imagine this is crazy. Imagine what this does to people. Imagine what it does to children who've grown up their entire life. Again, my kids, just so you know, my kids, like, they seem to be more or less okay with it because we don't have any real danger up here. A minute and a half is basically okay. But even my kids, months after these wars, my kids will ask me, is there a chance there's going to be an alarm tonight while we're sleeping? It'll happen months later. Okay, certain sounds will be triggering for myself. The sound of a car door closing. Just imagine that sound. It's like a little thump. That's exactly what it sounds like. These explosions from my house. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like a car door closing. So right now I hear this all day and all night. But it's explosions happening, a few miles away. But in a month or 2, whatever, when the war ends, I'll hear that same sound for a few weeks, and it'll immediately bring me back to these. And I'll just tell a story that when we were in Sderot, we met back in the day when us teachers were just learning how to guide in Sderot, we met the head of security in Sderot, who I actually don't know what happened to him in October 7th, and I should probably find that out, but I don't know. The police station there was destroyed, but I don't know what happened to the guy who at the time was the head of security. But he told us a story of his own child who became an army officer. And he said to his kid, listen, you're in the army. If you're a kid now in Israel, basically, think about it, this has been happening since the year 2000. So these kids have never known a day in their life where rockets weren't, I mean, some days are quiet, but it's since the day they've been born, there's been rockets flying into Israel and they've been having to run for their lives. So you got to raise kids. First, by the way, just an aside, how do you raise kids that aren't like rabid anti-Arab racists? That's not easy, right? To teach your kids that there's like that like the people in Gaza are shooting at us, and the kids like 5, 6, 7 years old, they don't understand nuance. These kids grow up in a force, and we try really hard, but like these kids grow up knowing these people want to kill us. It's crazy to think that a 5, 6, 7-year-old knows that they have to run because people are shooting at them. I mean, that's literally, your kid has to know this on a certain level. We try to sanitize it a little bit, but the kids understand this is life and death. Someone's shooting you, you have to go to the bomb shelter. How do you get these kids to not hate all these people? It's difficult as an Israeli. Anyway, the story of what happened in Sderot, the head of security, his son became an officer in the army, and he says to him, son, you're an officer. Make sure you go easy on the kids from Sderot because they're like you. They had this difficult upbringing. Make sure you go easy on them. And his child tells him, no problem, Dad. It's only a few weeks later that his son calls him up and says, Dad, I'm sorry, but I had a kid from Sderot in my unit, and I actually kicked him out of the unit. I had told me to leave. And the father's like yelling at his kid, why did you do that? We just spoke about this a minute ago. I told you to go easy on these kids. What are you talking about? He said, Dad, we're a commando unit. The guy wets the bed every night. I cannot have a bedwetter in my commando unit. It brings everybody else's morale down. I kicked him out. It is important to understand this is the kind of thing. And even when the Washington Post says things like these rockets are just a bee stinging a bear's behind, because most Israelis don't die. First of all, I'm glad we don't die, but no one should underestimate the amount of psychological difficulty the people that live in that area have been dealing with now for 23 years. And the fact that Israel has allowed this to happen, it was a failure before October 7th, and now it's untenable. And now, of course, we must stop it. We cannot live like this anymore. And October 7th was kind of the obvious exclamation point that made that clear to everybody. I'm almost finished. I just want to show you one or two more things before we go. I want to show you on that same note, just like kind of like how just emotionally, I guess, disturbing the situation is. Just want to show you, a couple things about these rockets, which I think are worth pointing out. So the rockets, the Hamas rockets, this is a house that's been destroyed by a rocket. This is what happens to these rockets. Again, these are the different kinds of rockets. They're very, very large. Some of them are small, some of them are larger. But here's what I want to show you. I want to show you that this is what they look like, first of all. This is what the shells look like when they fall in Israel. Some are larger than others. But what's amazing here, I don't know if you can tell, is that these rockets in the picture, some of them are painted green. Now, this is remarkable. The ones that are painted green, the reason they're painted is because certain terrorist groups in Israel, there's different terrorist groups in Gaza. There's Hamas, there's also Islamic Jihad, there's a few others. And it was frustrating that when they'd fire rockets, the Israeli news would always report that Hamas was firing rockets, and other groups were getting upset that they weren't getting the credit for firing rockets. This is amazing. Normally, if you're going to try to murder someone, you try to get away with it, right? No, not in this case. It's why they brought GoPros in on October 7th and videotaped the whole thing, because no, they want to claim credit for trying to kill Israelis and Jews. And so they paint their rockets so everyone will know this one's from Fatah, and this one's from Hamas, and this one's from Islamic Jihad, and to claim credit for these war crimes, these attempted murders. So one of these rockets is called the M75. So you have to, in order to understand the evil Hamas psyche, you got to understand the story of the M75. M75 debuted about 10 years ago. Okay, it's a homemade. A lot of these great rockets, the good ones they have, great in quotes, but the advanced ones are smuggled in. They're Iranian or they're Chinese. Or Russian, and they smuggle them in. But the M75 is a homemade rocket, okay, that they have factories for in Gaza, and they fired it a number of times towards Jerusalem, okay, in 2011 or 12, I forget. I think 2011. It didn't hit Jerusalem, by the way. It actually hit Arab areas around Jerusalem, just south of Jerusalem, but they fired it towards Jerusalem, and people in Jerusalem had to go to the shelter as well, which is rare. But it happened for the first time in 2012. and it was an M75. Now, first of all, keep in mind that Jerusalem is over a third Arab population and has Muslim holy sites too, I'm sure you're aware of. They don't know where these rockets are going to hit. These rockets might have hit the Dome of the Rock for all they know, or killed Arab people for all they know. They actually did land in Arab areas, didn't hurt anybody as far as I know. But the M75, because they fired it at civilian areas, take a look at this. See, this is unbelievable. They have like a huge traffic circle, right? Celebrating the M75. How amazing is this? The rocket that we invented, that we fired at Islam's third holiest site. This is unbelievable. You can actually see M75, this is for real, cologne and perfume, his and hers, that you can buy in the Gaza Strip, right? Celebrating the rocket they fired towards Islam's third holiest site, of course, because it's Israel's capital as well. That's why they celebrate it. Here's someone making a snowman, M75, right? It's an unbelievable, I'm just trying to show you the kind of evil, really, that we're dealing with, right? People that are celebrating a rocket that was fired at Jerusalem with things like perfume and snowmen and things like that. So what the overall conclusion here, which I'm really almost finished now, is, you know, when the Washington Post says these things, you know, tries to belittle the threat from Gaza in all kinds of ways, and then what you're seeing all the time, no, the threat is real. The rockets are war crimes. They can kill. When they don't kill, they traumatize. And the fact that our enemies celebrate this and bring GoPros in to film their murders and try to claim credit, as you can see in this picture, for their rockets, just shows the kind of enemy that we're dealing with. And I want to end with one last video, and then I'll be done. Like I said, just a little background for the video, and then I'll end with it. Of course, if anybody has questions, I'll take questions. I know it's getting a bit late for you. Well, late for me and long for you. In 2008, that was the first time that Israel fought in Gaza, and that was only 3 years after we had given Gaza back, or basically to the Palestinians for the first time. We fought against Hamas in 2008, and that was the first time that the UN called us war criminals. Okay, which was, again, I talked about that in the beginning. The fact that we gave the land back and then we're called war criminals 3 years later doesn't make Israelis happy for a lot of reasons. And the most important one being that it's not true, obviously. Anyway, you might remember the Goldstone report. I'm not going to talk about it now for the sake of time, but what happened was the UN called us war criminals, and there was a debate in the UN about this report called the Goldstone report, about whether or not Israel, in fact, is a war criminal nation. So there was a British high-ranking soldier. His name was Colonel Richard Kemp. Maybe you've heard about him by now. He's done, I think, JNF events. If you haven't heard about him, you should know about him. He was not a Zionist, not Jewish, but he saw, as a British soldier, he saw the insane injustice that Israel was being treated with, and said, "Wait a minute." He had been. You'll hear his speech in a second. He fought in Iraq. He fought in Afghanistan. He knows how terrorist groups embed themselves in civilians and make it impossible to fight them without killing civilians. And he basically concluded that if England and other countries are treated the way Israel's treated by the world, then the terrorists will simply win. You're handing the terrorists a victory on a silver platter. And he kind of made it his crusade, starting in 2008, to explain how war actually works, right? It's very, very easy for someone who's never been in war, doesn't know anything about war, to say that Israel's evil and a war criminal. So he said, "No, I've been in war, and I'll tell you how it is." And he basically made his crusade ever since to defend Israel's conduct in war, because he knows that not because it's not even about Israel for him. For him, it's about the entire Western world. If anybody else was held to the standards we are held to, then simply the terrorists would win. ISIS would still exist, and all kinds of other. I could go on and on about how much worse the world would be. So here's Colonel Richard Kemp's speech about Israel's conduct in war. This goes back to 2008. He's got newer speeches since, but this one is the original. I think still in many ways the best.
I now give the floor to United Nations Watch.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm the former commander of British forces in Afghanistan. I served with NATO and the United Nations, commanded troops in Northern Ireland, Bosnia and Macedonia, and participated in the Gulf War. I spent considerable time in Iraq since the 2003 invasion and worked on international terrorism for the UK government's Joint Intelligence Committee. Mr. President, based on my knowledge and experience, I can say this. During Operation Cast Lead, the Israeli Defence Forces did more to safeguard the rights of civilians in a combat zone than any other army in the history of warfare. Israel did so while facing an enemy that deliberately positioned its military capability behind the human shield of the civilian population. Hamas, like Hezbollah, are expert at driving the media agenda. Both will always have people ready to give interviews condemning Israeli forces for war crimes. They are adept at staging and distorting incidents. The IDF faces a challenge that we British do not have to face to the same extent. It is the automatic Pavlovian presumption by many in the international media and international human rights groups that the IDF are in the wrong, that they are abusing human rights. The truth is that the IDF took extraordinary measures to give Gaza civilians notice of targeted areas, dropping over 2 million leaflets and making over 100,000 phone calls. Many missions that could have taken out Hamas military capability were aborted to prevent civilian casualties. During the conflict, the IDF allowed huge amounts of humanitarian aid into Gaza. To deliver aid virtually into your enemy's hands is, to the military tactician, normally quite unthinkable. But the IDF took on those risks. Despite all of this, of course innocent civilian lives were lost. War is chaos and full of mistakes. There have been mistakes by the British, American and other forces in Afghanistan and in Iraq, many of which can be put down to human error. But mistakes are not war crimes. More than anything, the civilian casualties were a consequence of Hamas's way of fighting. Hamas deliberately tried to sacrifice its own civilians. Mr. President, Israel had no choice, apart from defending its people, to stop Hamas from attacking them with. And I say this again, the IDF did more to safeguard the rights of civilians in a combat zone than any other army in the history of warfare. Thank you, Mr. President.
So we'll end there. I think it's a great ending. I just want to show you one last image. I'll leave you with one last image, and then we'll finish up. And the lasting image I want to leave you with is the image of the roof of one of the major yeshivas in Sderot, which has this. You can tell what it is. A Chanukiah made up of rockets, right? We take the rockets, we fashion them into something that shows Jewish strength. And every Hanukkah, by the way, this Chanukiah is lit by families of people that have been affected by the rockets. And in the distance, of course, Gaza can see, only a kilometer away, Gaza can see the strength of the people of Israel. And right now, they're understanding on a different level what the strength of the people of Israel is, and the fact that we have no choice but to be victorious, which we will. So, Am Yisrael Chai, and thank you very much for listening. I appreciate everybody's time.